The splintering of wood was a sound that belonged in a forest, not the cramped hallway of a third-floor apartment. At 8:14 p.m., the noise was sharp, violent, a percussive crack that vibrated through the floorboards and up Daniel's spine. He was on his knees, one hand instinctively shielding his 8-year-old son, Leo, who was pressed into the corner behind the worn floral sofa. The other hand was held out, a useless gesture of peace. The front door, its lock now a mangled ruin of metal and fractured pine, hung crookedly on a single hinge. 2 men filled the doorway, their bulk seeming to suck the very air from the small living room. The taller one, Russo, had a face like a slab of concrete, all hard planes and small, dark eyes. The other, Pike, was shorter, thicker, with a nervous energy that made him more dangerous. He was the one who had kicked the door. "This is your final notice, mechanic." Russo's voice was a low, gravelly rumble, devoid of emotion. "Mr. Thorne is a patient man. But his patience has limits." Daniel's gaze flickered from the men to the small, shaking form of his son. Leo's face was pale, his eyes wide with a terror that clawed at Daniel's heart. "I told you the check was delayed. It'll be here Friday." Daniel's voice was tight, strained. He was a mechanic, a man used to solving problems with his hands, with logic and tools. But this was a problem beyond his ken. His leg, stiff and aching in its brace from the workshop accident 6 months ago, was a constant reminder of his vulnerability. Pike took a step inside, his boots scuffing the faded linoleum. He picked up a framed photo from the end table. It was of Daniel and his late wife, Sarah, smiling on a beach. "Nice family," Pike sneered, his thumb smudging Sarah's face. "Be ashamed to see it broken up." He placed the frame back down with deliberate force, the glass cracking with a faint spiderweb pattern. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He couldn't, not with Leo watching. Russo motioned for Pike to leave. "Friday, Daniel." Not Saturday. They turned and walked away, their footsteps heavy on the stairs, leaving behind the cold draft from the broken door and the thick, suffocating silence of fear. Daniel waited until the sound of their car faded into the city's hum before he moved. He pulled Leo out from behind the sofa, holding him tight. The boy didn't cry. He just trembled, his small hands clutching his father's shirt. After a long moment, Daniel gently released him and limped over to a small wooden chest by the window. He opened it past old tax records and spare parts for small engines, and pulled out a worn, circular leather patch. It was faded and cracked with age, but the embossed image of a stoic eagle, its wings shielding a gear and a wrench, was still clear. It was his father's, a relic from a life Daniel had never known, a memento from a club called the Sentinel Riders. He held it in his palm, the cool leather a stark contrast to the burning shame in his gut. It was a symbol of a strength he did not feel he possessed. The next morning, the gray light of dawn did little to soften the ugliness of the broken door. Daniel had wedged a chair under the knob, a flimsy defense that offered no real security, only the illusion of it. After dropping a subdued Leo at school, he went to the 12th precinct. The station smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. A bored-looking officer with a name tag that read Miller listened to Daniel's story with an air of profound indifference. Daniel explained everything. The threats, the men, his landlord Marcus Thorne, the door. He showed Miller the photos he'd taken on his phone of the splintered jam and the cracked picture frame. Officer Miller sighed, leaning back in his squeaky chair. "Look, Mr. Carter," he began, his tone patronizing. "What you have here is a landlord-tenant dispute. It's a civil matter." Daniel stared, incredulous. "They kicked my door in. They threatened me in front of my son. Did they put their hands on you?" Miller asked, not looking up from his computer screen. "No, but..." "Then it's they said. Thorne's people will say they knocked and the door was faulty. You'll say they kicked it in. Who's the judge gonna believe? A prominent property owner or a tenant who, you admit, is behind on his rent?" The word stung, reducing his struggle to a simple, damning equation. Prominent versus poor. Paid up versus behind. The truth didn't seem to be a variable. "So you're not going to do anything?" Daniel asked, his voice quiet but edged with desperation. "I'll file a report," Miller said, typing with 2 fingers. "Harassment, destruction of property, alleged. But honestly, don't expect a call back. My advice? Pay your rent. Or move. These things have a way of working themselves out." Daniel walked out of the precinct and back into the indifferent city. The sun felt cold. He felt the weight of hundreds of windows in the surrounding buildings. Hundreds of people living their lives, unaware and unconcerned. He saw it in his own building, too. Mrs. Gable in 2B, who had always had a kind word, now hurried past him in the hallway, her eyes fixed on the floor. Mr. Henderson in 4A, who used to complain loudly about the lack of hot water, was now silent. They had all heard the commotion last night. They all knew about Thorne's enforcers. But their fear was a currency Thorne spent freely, and it bought their silence. Daniel was alone. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed, protecting the powerful from the complaints of the weak. The police report, he knew, was just a piece of paper that would be filed away in a cabinet, another testament to institutional apathy. He was just another problem for someone else to ignore. The apartment at 3C was small, but it was a meticulously ordered world built for 2. Every inch of space was testament to Daniel's quiet, methodical nature. Leo's crayon drawings of superheroes and rocket ships were taped neatly on the refrigerator door, a splash of chaotic color in the otherwise subdued kitchen. On a small workbench in the corner, disassembled lawnmower carburetors and chainsaw engines were laid out on a clean rag, each tiny screw and spring in its proper place. This was how Daniel made ends meet now, the small engine repairs he could do from home, his body no longer able to handle the long hours and heavy lifting of a full-time auto mechanic. The steel brace on his right leg was a permanent fixture, a souvenir from the day a hydraulic lift failed and a 2-ton sedan crushed his tibia. His disability checks were just enough to be insulting, never quite covering the gap his old salary left. The late rent wasn't from irresponsibility. It was the result of a cascade of bad luck. A client's check for a big generator repair had bounced. The subsequent bank fee had overdrawn his account. The disability payment, always processed by a faceless bureaucracy, was 3 days late. It was a domino effect that people like Marcus Thorne and Officer Miller could never comprehend. For them, $100 was an inconvenience. For Daniel, it was the difference between security and a splintered door. His life with Leo was a fabric woven from small, gentle routines. In the evenings, he would help Leo with his math homework at the small kitchen table, his large, grease-stained fingers patiently guiding Leo's smaller ones as they traced numbers. He taught his son the logic of machines, the importance of patience and precision. "Everything has a place, Leo," he'd say, pointing to the parts of a bicycle chain they were cleaning together. "You just have to see how it all fits." He was raising his son with the values his own father had taught him: integrity, self-reliance, and the quiet dignity of a job well done. His wife Sarah had been the heart of their small family, her laughter the soundtrack of their lives. Since she'd been taken by a swift and merciless cancer 2 years ago, Daniel had tried to be both father and mother, a task that felt impossible most days. The cracked photo on the end table was a wound that would not heal. Now that memory, too, felt violated, tainted by Pike's greasy thumbprint. The building itself was a reflection of Thorne's neglect. Peeling paint in the hallways, a persistent damp smell from a leak in the basement, an elevator that was perpetually out of order. Thorne bought buildings like this in transitional neighborhoods, did the bare minimum to keep them habitable, and squeezed every last dollar from people with few other options. Daniel had never complained, just quietly fixed his own leaky faucet and replaced a faulty light switch in the hall. He believed in handling his own problems. But this was different. This wasn't a faulty switch. It was a broken system, and he was beginning to fear he didn't have the tools to fix it. The week that followed was a slow, grinding escalation of psychological warfare. The broken door was a constant, gaping wound in their home, a reminder that they were not safe. Daniel managed to rehang it, but the frame was too damaged for the lock to catch. He propped the chair against it every night, a pathetic talisman against the encroaching darkness. Russo and Pike were a constant presence. They didn't need to make direct threats anymore. Their existence was the threat. They would be there in the mornings, leaning against their car across the street when Daniel walked Leo to the bus stop. Their eyes would follow them, cold and predatory. One afternoon, Daniel came back from a grocery run to find the power to his apartment had been cut. He checked the breaker box in the hall. His switch had been deliberately flipped. He flipped it back on, his heart pounding. It was a small thing, but it was a violation, a message that they could enter his space, control his environment at will. He called the police again. A different officer, a woman named Chun, came this time. She was more sympathetic than Miller, but ultimately just as helpless. "There's no proof they did it," she said, her voice laced with genuine regret. "Without a witness or a camera, it's just your word against theirs." "I'm sorry." Daniel started his log. In a small, spiral-bound notebook, he documented everything with the precision of a mechanic diagnosing an engine problem. Tuesday, 4:15 p.m. Power cut to Unit 3C. Breaker in hallway tripped. Russo and Pike's vehicle observed on the street at 4:30 p.m. Wednesday, 7:20 a.m. Verbal harassment. Pike called me a cripple as I walked Leo to the bus stop. Thursday, 11 p.m. Loud banging on the shared wall from the vacant apartment next door. Lasted for 10 minutes. He took more photos. The newest was of his car's front right tire, completely flat, a clean, deep slice in the sidewall that was unmistakably deliberate. The tire was old, the cost to replace it a significant blow to his fragile budget. He tried calling the city's housing authority. He spent 45 minutes navigating an automated phone system, a robotic voice cheerfully directing him through an endless loop of numbered options before the line disconnected. The frustration was immense, a feeling of screaming into a void. He felt himself shrinking, the walls of his life closing in. The worst part was seeing the effect on Leo. His son, once a bright, bubbly kid, was now quiet and watchful. He stopped asking to play in the small park behind the building. He drew pictures of monsters with dark, empty eyes. At night, Daniel would hear him whimpering in his sleep. The fear was a poison seeping into every corner of their lives, and Daniel felt utterly powerless to stop it. The system wasn't just failing to protect him. It was actively enabling his tormentors, its bureaucracy and indifference providing the perfect cover for their cruelty. The breaking point arrived not with a bang, but in the damp, humming quiet of the basement laundry room. It was a Saturday. Daniel was transferring a load of Leo's clothes to the dryer when the door creaked open. Russo and Pike filled the doorway, blocking the only exit. The room suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. Daniel's hands froze over the pile of damp t-shirts. "Just doing my laundry," he said, his voice steady despite the frantic drumming in his chest. Pike smiled, a thin, unpleasant expression. He took a step closer, invading Daniel's personal space. The smell of cheap cologne and cigarettes was overwhelming. "Mr. Thorne was asking about you," Pike said conversationally. "He was wondering if you'd found the money yet. He worries about the kids in this building. Doesn't want them to have to see an eviction. It can be so messy." Then Russo, who had been silent until now, spoke. His voice was soft, which made it all the more terrifying. "Leo, that's his name, right? Nice kid. Smart. We saw him at the bus stop. Be a shame if he had to find a new school, a new home. Be a shame if his dad couldn't take him to school anymore because of another accident." The mention of his son's name, the thinly veiled threat against his child and his own physical safety, was a line drawn in blood. All the fear that had been simmering inside Daniel coalesced into a cold, hard knot of rage. But he was trapped, physically and strategically. He said nothing, just stared back, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. They held the moment for a few seconds longer, enjoying his silent terror, then turned and left. Daniel leaned against the warm metal of the dryer, his legs shaking. They hadn't touched him, but he felt violated to his very soul. That night, the weight of his failure was a physical presence in the room. He sat in the dark, the useless chair propped against the door, the logbook open on his lap. He had done everything right. He had called the police. He had documented the evidence. He had tried to work within the system, and the system had spit him out. He was a good father, a hard worker, an honest man. None of it mattered. He put his head in his hands, a wave of utter despair washing over him. Leo, who was supposed to be asleep, stood silently in the doorway of his bedroom. He had seen the look on his father's face, a look of defeat he had never seen before. It scared him more than the loud men or the broken door. He padded quietly back to his room. He remembered the stories his grandpa John used to tell, stories of his old motorcycle club, the Sentinel Riders. They weren't just a club, his grandpa had said. They were a brotherhood. They looked out for their own. In his father's closet, in a small wooden box, was the old leather patch. Leo had seen his father holding it. Next to it was an old, cracked, leather-bound address book. While his father sat frozen in the living room, Leo took the book and Daniel's phone. He flipped through the brittle pages until he found a name. Jedediah. Sentinels, he didn't know the man. He didn't know what to say. With trembling fingers, the 8-year-old boy typed a simple, desperate message. A digital prayer sent out into the darkness. Please help my dad. They are hurting him. This is John Carter's grandson. He hit send, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The message arrived at 5:17 a.m., a single, lonely chime in the pre-dawn stillness of a small house 100 miles away. Jedediah Vance, president of the Sentinel Riders, was already awake, sipping black coffee and watching the stars fade. He was 65, with a graying beard and hands calloused from a lifetime of turning wrenches and gripping handlebars. He didn't recognize the number, but the name John Carter hit him like a physical blow. John had been one of the founders, a man of unshakable integrity, gone 15 years now. He read the message from the boy, his grandson. They are hurting him. The words were simple, childish, and carried more weight than a 1,000-page legal brief. The Sentinels had a code, an unwritten law that superseded all others. You answer the call, especially a call from the blood of a brother. Jedediah picked up his own phone. His first call was to a man they called Preacher, the club's road captain. His second was to Marcus Aurelius Cole, a corporate lawyer in the city who still wore his club colors under his $1,000 suits. The message was the same. It's for John Carter's boy. A code 3-inch. There was no hesitation on the other end of the lines. Only a quiet, where and when. The mobilization began. A montage of ordinary men transforming into a singular purpose. In a suburban garage, a high school history teacher meticulously polished the chrome on his Road King. Across the state, a trauma surgeon finished a 24-hour shift, trading his scrubs for worn leather. A master welder in a shipyard, a quiet IT consultant, a retired cop. Men from different walks of life, bound by two things: their past military service and the patch on their backs. 6:30 a.m. The first 5 bikes converged at a gas station off the interstate, their engines a low, respectful rumble. 8 a.m. 15 more joined them at a rendezvous point 20 miles outside the city, forming a silent, disciplined line. 10 a.m. The count was 47. They weren't a gang preparing for a brawl. They were a rapid response team executing a mission. Jedediah held a brief meeting. This is a presence operation, he stated, his voice calm and authoritative. No contact, no threats, no escalation. We are witnesses. We are a wall. Aurelius is our legal liaison. Doc is our designated medic. Ghost, you're on comms and documentation. High-resolution video of everything. The final call was made to Sarah Jenkins, a tenacious young reporter for an independent digital news outlet known for tackling stories the major networks ignored. Jedediah kept it brief. Oakwood Apartments, 1,200 hours. A story about tenant rights you won't want to miss. He gave her no other details. As the 47 engines roared to life in perfect unison, the sound was not one of aggression, but of profound, unshakable purpose. They moved onto the highway, falling into a flawless 2x2 formation, a river of steel and leather flowing toward a city that was about to be reminded of what true community protection looked like. At 11:58 a.m., A black Mercedes sedan purred to a stop in front of the Oakwood apartments. Marcus Thorne stepped out, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. He was a man who exuded an aura of expensive, unearned confidence. Russo and Pike climbed out of a trailing sedan, their usual thuggish swagger on full display. Thorne's visit was a power play, a personal appearance to remind the tenants who was in charge, to ensure the recent pressure on Daniel Carter had sufficiently terrorized the rest of the building into silence. He was about to lecture Daniel personally about the responsibilities of tenancy. As his polished shoe touched the cracked pavement, a new sound intruded on the quiet street. It began as a distant tremor, a low hum that vibrated in the chest. It grew steadily, resolving itself into the distinct, syncopated thunder of V-twin engines. Thorne paused, annoyed by the interruption. Then he saw them. Cresting the hill at the end of the block was a wave of motorcycles. They weren't speeding or swerving. They advanced with the slow, deliberate precision of a funeral procession. 2 by 2, they rode in perfect formation, a silent, disciplined column that seemed to have no end. 47 bikes. They filled the street, their engines dropping to a synchronized, idling growl that was more intimidating than any roar. The riders swung their legs over, dismounting as one. They were men of all ages, their faces set and serious. They wore clean, matching leather vests with the Sentinel rider patch on the back. They didn't speak. They didn't gesture. They simply lined the entire length of the block, standing beside their machines, their arms crossed. They formed a silent, immovable cordon. Sarah Jenkins and her cameraman were already there, positioned perfectly on the opposite sidewalk, their camera rolling, capturing Thorne's stunned expression. His face, moments before a mask of smug authority, had paled. The color drained from Russo and Pike's faces as well. Their brand of intimidation relied on isolation and the belief that no one was watching. Suddenly, they were the main attraction in a public spectacle, outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Other doors in the apartment building began to crack open. Mrs. Gable peered out, her face a mixture of fear and hope. Mr. Henderson stood in his doorway, his arms crossed, mirroring the riders below. The biker's silent, lawful presence was a shield, and behind it, courage began to bloom. Thorne's authority, built on fear, was being dismantled before his eyes, not by violence, but by the simple, powerful act of showing up. Jedediah dismounted from his bike at the head of the column. He moved with a calm deliberateness that commanded attention. He walked past Thorne's Mercedes without a glance and entered the building. Daniel, drawn by the incredible sound, was standing in his doorway, Leo clutching his leg. He saw the patch on Jedediah's vest and his breath caught in his throat. It was the same eagle his father had worn. Jedediah stopped in front of him. His eyes were kind but held a deep gravity. "Daniel Carter?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Daniel nodded, speechless. "I'm Jedediah Vance. I rode with your father. We got your son's message." He placed a heavy, reassuring hand on Daniel's shoulder for a brief moment. "We're here," the simple words carried the weight of an army. Relief, so potent it almost buckled Daniel's knees, washed over him. He wasn't alone anymore. Jedediah then turned and walked back outside, stopping directly in front of Sarah Jenkins and her camera. He didn't make grand accusations or threats. He spoke in a clear, measured tone. "We are the Sentinel Riders, a registered non-profit organization dedicated to supporting veterans and their families. We are here today at the request of the family of one of our fallen brothers." He held up Daniel's small, spiral-bound notebook. "This is a log of harassment and property destruction kept by Mr. Carter, a disabled single father, after his requests for help from his landlord, Mr. Marcus Thorne, and the 12th Precinct were ignored." He then presented the photos from Daniel's phone. Sarah's cameraman zoomed in on the images. The splintered door, the cracked photo, the slashed tire. Emboldened, Mrs. Gable from 2B stepped out onto the sidewalk. "He's a slumlord," she called out, her voice trembling but clear. "My heat was off for a week in January. He told me to wear a sweater." Others joined in. A young mother from the first floor pointed to a dark patch of mold on her exterior wall. "My son has asthma because of this. I've sent 16 emails." The trickle of complaint became a flood. Each story, a testament to Thorne's callous negligence, was captured by the news camera. Thorne, flustered and red-faced, finally spoke. "This is harassment. You're a biker gang. You're intimidating my tenants." That was the cue for Marcus Aurelius Cole. Dressed in a crisp suit that looked out of place yet perfectly natural over his leather vest, he stepped forward. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice the calm, cutting tone of a courtroom veteran. "We are a 501c3 organization, as my colleague stated, and I am Mr. Carter's legal representative." He held up a thick manila envelope. "Consider yourself served with a notice of intent to file a class action lawsuit on behalf of the tenants of this building for gross negligence, illegal eviction practices, and systematic harassment." Russo and Pike, standing behind Thorne, looked utterly lost. Their physical menace was useless against a lawsuit and a news camera. The power they wielded in dark hallways and basement laundry rooms had vanished under the bright midday sun, exposed as the pathetic bullying it truly was. Their masks of intimidation had dropped, revealing nothing but hollow fear beneath. The story aired at 6 o'clock, leading the local evening news. Sarah Jenkins had expertly woven the footage together. The silent, imposing line of motorcycles, the tenants' emotional testimonies, Thorne's flustered face, and the calm, undeniable evidence presented by Jedediah and Aurelius. The report ended with a close-up on Daniel's handwritten log, each entry a quiet indictment of the system that had failed him. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. The news station's switchboard lit up. The story was shared thousands of times on social media. The mayor's office, sensing a public relations disaster, released a statement before the broadcast was even over, promising a full and immediate investigation into the practices of Thorne Properties. The effect on the official channels that had previously dismissed Daniel was seismic. The City Housing Authority, publicly shamed by the litany of documented complaints, announced an emergency audit of all Thorne-owned buildings. The 12th Precinct, specifically called out in the news report for its inaction, found itself in the uncomfortable glare of the spotlight. An internal affairs investigation was launched into Officer Miller's handling of Daniel's initial complaint. Suddenly, the reports that had been ignored were top priority. Faced with a PR nightmare, a multi-million-dollar class action lawsuit, and the full attention of city regulators, Marcus Thorne's empire of indifference began to crumble. His lawyers called Aurelius the very next morning. The negotiations were swift and brutally one-sided. Thorne, desperate to avoid further public exposure and legal jeopardy, capitulated on every point. The resolution wasn't achieved with fists, but with signatures on a legally binding settlement agreement. Thorne agreed to fund a complete top-to-bottom renovation of the Oakwood apartments, supervised by an independent inspector chosen by the tenants. He fired Russo and Pike, and a permanent restraining order was granted, barring them from coming within 500 feet of the building or any of its residents. For Daniel, the victory was personal and profound. His late rent was forgiven, and his lease was renewed with a 2-year rent freeze. The day a professional construction crew arrived to install a new, solid-core door with a heavy-duty deadbolt was a day of quiet celebration. It was more than a door. It was a symbol that his home was once again a sanctuary. Justice had been delivered, not in the shadows, but in the full, unforgiving light of public accountability. 6 months later, the Oakwood apartments were transformed. Fresh paint, new windows, and a fully functional elevator had replaced the previous squalor. The persistent smell of damp was gone, replaced by the faint scent of sawdust and fresh plaster. More importantly, the atmosphere of fear had been replaced by one of community. The tenants, once isolated islands of anxiety, had formed an official tenants association. Daniel Carter, the quiet mechanic who had been their catalyst, was their unanimously elected president. He now spoke at city council meetings, advocating for stronger tenant protection laws, his voice steady and confident. The The Sentinel riders had channeled the momentum of that day into something permanent. They established the Riders' Shield program, a pro bono initiative staffed by volunteer members, lawyers, paralegals, and mediators to help veterans and their families navigate legal disputes. It provided free counsel for issues ranging from landlord harassment to VA benefit appeals, ensuring that what happened to Daniel would not happen to others. Their clubhouse, once just a place for camaraderie, now had a small office with a dedicated phone line that was always answered. The ripples of that single confrontation continued to spread. Officer Miller was formally reprimanded for dereliction of duty and reassigned to a desk job, a quiet but significant admission of failure by the department. The City Council passed the Tenants' Bill of Rights, a new ordinance that streamlined the complaint process and increased penalties for landlords like Thorne. Sarah Jenkins' exposé, titled The Thunder of Silence, won a prestigious regional award for investigative journalism, launching her career and cementing her outlet's reputation for fearless reporting. The final scene of this chapter unfolded on a warm summer evening. Daniel and Leo were on their small balcony, watering a planter box of tomatoes they had planted together. The railing beneath their hands was smooth and freshly painted. Below, a single motorcycle pulled up to the curb. It was Jedediah. He didn't get off his bike. He simply looked up, his gaze meeting Daniel's. He gave a slow, respectful nod, a gesture that spoke volumes, of shared history, of a promise kept, of enduring brotherhood. Daniel nodded back, a quiet acknowledgement of the profound debt he owed. Leo, no longer a child haunted by shadows, waved enthusiastically. On the living room wall behind them, the old, cracked leather patch now sat in a simple wooden frame. It was no longer a relic of a forgotten past, but a living symbol. It represented the truth that sometimes the most powerful force for justice isn't the roar of an engine, but the unwavering courage of a community that refuses to be silent, and the honor of those who ride to answer the call.